Good morning. Welcome to the Point. The Michigan State Legislature is back at work this week, but before they took their spring break, I talked to three members of the House about what they would like to get accomplished in the next 3 months or so. We start with the leader of the Democrats in the House, Representative Sam Singh from East Lansing, and what he would like to get done in the second quarter.
Well, it's actually things I would have hoped that the Republicans would have helped us get done in the first quarter. And those two things were first, actually doing something real on roads. They passed a half measure this past couple weeks ago, which basically takes money from one budget year to the next, and they claim that they're actually fixing the roads. And we all know that nothing is really going to change with that. And, you know, we offered up to the governor last year and others that if they want to have a serious conversation about how we fix the roads, that we're willing to have that conversation, because it's clear now that the 2015 plan that they voted on did not do enough to actually fix the roads. So that's the first thing. I think we have another shot at it in the second quarter, and I'm willing to have that conversation, but unfortunately Republicans have refused to do that. The second thing is we had a group of business leaders and education leaders came out with a second report on school funding and showed again that we are underfunding all of our school districts to the level of about $2,000 per pupil. And so we need to have a serious conversation on how we fund our public schools. I was hoping that that would have started in the budget. There's some good things in the budget, but overall the large dollar amounts that are necessary were not done by the governor. And so I do think we have an opportunity in the second quarter to try to fix some of those mistakes.
You're a student of the budget. You know how this works here, and we've seen estimates. We'll start first with roads. That infrastructure, and that's not just roads, but the stuff underneath too, is a $4 billion price tag. Few would argue that something more needs to be done. I mean, we've seen example after example of roads and infrastructure underground that needs to be worked on. But the question is, where does that money come from? Because even though it's a $56 billion budget, as you would be quick to point out, very little of that is money that you can actually appropriate.
Right, and I think that's why you have to have a serious conversation. Everybody has to get back to the table and start talking about that. You know, I think the business community, especially when I take a look at the big trucks that are allowed to take twice the amount of weight across the state than in any other state in the country, that we need to stop that. We need to make sure that overweight trucks are paying their fair share, that we are actually going after those companies that abuse the system. There's revenue to be had in that group. I think there's revenue to be had as you partner with local communities and take a look at bonding and allowing for additional resources to be brought forward. So there's a lot of good ideas out there. Unfortunately, the Republicans have refused to have that conversation. I guess they think the roads are fine and the bridges are fine, and so they're going to just continue down this path. But Democrats want to have this conversation because anywhere we go in the state, no one says that the roads are doing well.
One of the most difficult things to do in Lansing is to cut spending to whatever the program is, because every dollar has a constituency. I sometimes think that that's even more difficult than raising revenues or raising taxes. But it occurs that in that conversation, one or both of those things would have to happen. Is there a place, you talk about big trucks and talk about companies, is there a place for more from the general population? In other words, there are 10 million or so of us out there that are using those roads too. We've already seen fees increase, but to get to that number, to get the roads really fixed, do we have to pay more too?
Well, I think we have to look at our budget and start off there. You know, I think right now we pay more in corrections than we should be. I think there have been a number of estimates that we could probably take another $500 million a year, $500 million a year to put towards other types of things within the budget. So I'd first take a look at how we look at the corrections budget. Second, I do think we have to have this longer term conversation. We've been suggesting that there needs to be tax fairness here in the state, and there's ways of taking a look at that, and that you actually bring down the rates for most of the state, but then you have those higher earners that are making $1 million, $1 billion in the state, and you ask them to pay a little bit more. Those ways of doing that, we've done that on the federal level for years, and we can bring in additional revenue. And so to me, I think we can have those conversations, and Democrats are ready to have them, but at the same time, we have to be looking at other issues. Right now, healthcare is a big crisis point in the state. You take a look at our citizens, they're really worried about what's happening in Washington, D.C. They're seeing their prescription drugs increase. We have a proposal that would at least begin to look at that. WOLT has been introduced as of last year, still hasn't had a hearing. And so if we are going to try to tackle these things that are facing everyday citizens, we hope that these Republicans are going to take those things seriously and allow them to have hearings and allow them to be voted on as well.
When you talk about having the higher earners pay more, you're talking about a graduated income tax?
That's right. On the federal level, we do have a graduated income tax. It works well on the federal level. It works well in a variety of other states. And at that point in time, we can actually bring down the tax rate for about 90% of the state, and then the higher earners pay a little bit more, and that little bit more ends up raising about $800 million in additional revenue that could go towards the schools, that could go towards our roads, and those are the types of things we'd like to have a conversation on.
First, you talked about schools and a new report that has come out, and if there are two issues that have permeated my coverage of this body and this Capitol over the past couple of decades, those two things, roads and schools, and how to pay for each, not just how to pay, but how they should be operated, what the mission should be, how should we build roads, how should we educate kids. Talk a little bit about those recommendations and about your thoughts of what we should be doing, particularly with regard to pre-K through 12. Obviously, higher education is another question, but in that very basic first 13 years.
Well, I think we have to take a look at it, this really being a K through 14 system. I do think the next 2 years after you graduate, whether it's going to community college or getting a certificate, we should be paying for that as well. That there should be a system that anybody who wants a job, that they can graduate from high school, but then go on to a community college and have that be tuition free. I think there needs to be a K through 14 system, and that's something that Democrats are fighting for. And so to me, it is a reallocation of resources. Right now, we are taking money out of the school aid fund and putting it into universities, and universities are good things, but this governor has taken money out every year to the detriment of those K through 12 institutions to give it to higher education, when I'd rather have all that money stay in those K through 12 schools. And so those discrepancies of what's happening in every school district, which is now required schools to have high classroom sizes, not paying their teachers well enough, so they're turning over at a much more rapid rate, those things can be actually dealt with. And if we do something like that, I think you'll see a very different K through 12 system and eventually a K through 14 system that we'll all be proud of.
Fellow Representative and Democrat John Hoadley from Kalamazoo says he too is interested in infrastructure and jobs, but jobs with better wages, he says. Do you have a dollar figure where you would like to land? I know we've heard $4 billion for infrastructure, which includes not just roads, but what's underneath them. But do you have a dollar figure, and where would you like to see that money come from?
So I don't dispute the governor's report that said we're underfunding infrastructure by about $4 billion every single year. And that's a combination of state, federal, and local dollars. But the point is that, if you were looking at your house this way, you would be basically neglecting the giant hole in your roof year after year. And you would be saying, because we can't figure out a way to pay for it. We as a state can't settle for that. The infrastructure plan, more like a scam coming out of the Trump administration, won't be the dollars. We really need to have a serious conversation about funding our roads, bridges, and pipes. And what that means is, anyone that tells you can do it without raising taxes or fees, they're just lying to you. They're telling you what you want to hear. There isn't enough funds to do it. We got to be looking at the users of those roads, the heavy trucks that aren't paying their fair share. We've got to be looking at maybe reconfiguring the way that we actually track miles and whatnot, but just leaning on the tired old registration fees and some of the things that aren't being sufficient now, that's not the way to go. We actually need to have a real conversation about it.
So some of that, if you talk about trucks and tracking mileage, would be user fees. But in order to get to that bigger number, you're going to have to talk about a general tax increase of some type, I would guess.
There's different ways to pay for it, right? At the end of the day, we are currently using a multifaceted approach to pay for the roads. It's just insufficient to get the job done. And it's sort of like telling us that we need to pull a Band-Aid off, right? I keep talking about these Band-Aids because they hurt, right? And in the legislature, instead of saying, here's what we need to do to actually solve the problem and rip it off, we keep pulling it back just a little bit by a little bit. And nobody likes that, right? Plus, it's all the pain with none of the gain. This is an opportunity where we're going to have to figure out what does it actually take to meet those infrastructure needs. And since we're going to be talking about beyond just roads, but infrastructure like pipes and bridges, perhaps there is some general fund expenditures that would make sense. But it also means that the folks that are promising that they're going to come to our communities and they're going to make jobs, many of which are not paying livable wages, but they extort from us tax breaks that are insufficient to cover their needs, that's the conversation we got to end. And so let's just be adults in the room, right? I know nobody likes talking about money, but when we promise you the world and we can't deliver even a road, that's the problem.
Let's talk a little bit about those jobs, because you also talked about not just numbers, but what those jobs are worth. And there are two questions. First, the questions of jobs that the administration, and on the website, it looks as if there are a lot of jobs that pay pretty good wages, but we don't have the skills for it. So that's one question out there. So as the governor and again, some of your colleagues talk more and more and with more seriousness about better job training for people who may not go to a 4-year college, maybe they go to a 2-year degree or a certificate program. Is that one way you get to, and we'll talk about the second part of the problem, people earning the amount of money that they need to live in the state of Michigan?
I want to push back on that. I talk to hardworking people every single day who are just looking for their shot. And because they've got a bunch of life experience, but maybe not exactly the right credential, that they're being told they can't even apply for the job. What happened to businesses being responsible for lifting folks up and providing some on-the-job training? Give some people in Michigan a shot. We're a state that builds things, that makes things, that invents things, that grows things. But we're being told, right, if you don't have exactly the right certificate, that you can't even apply for the job. And then on top of that, those same companies are coming to the state of Michigan and saying, we want you to pay for 100% of our training costs. We see it over and over again. So they want us to pay for the training, and they don't want to give people the shot of applying for those jobs. That's not sustainable. These companies are coming because we've got great people, and they're talented and they're skilled. But we need to be making sure then that they are living up to their part of the bargain. Oh yeah, one more thing. We see that there's a whole bunch of folks who are complaining about a lack of skilled jobs, but they're also supporting efforts that would then weaken our skilled trades, trying to take away prevailing wage or depress the number of skilled trades folks that we have, the wages that we want to pay them. And this is basic marketplace economy here, right? If you want good people, you got to pay the wages to do that. And our biggest companies are sitting on a lot more cash reserves than we've seen in American history. So it's time that the American people started benefiting from that.
When you talk about people earning enough money, how much is enough? We've seen this argument around the country, and there doesn't seem to be broad consensus about where you land, because there's obviously a trade-off. If X amount of dollars is what a family or an individual needs to make, and their job skills put them working at job A that typically pays beneath that, how do you reconcile those two things? Because there is the need for people to be able to sustain themselves, and there is a need for business to be able to continue to be profitable.
Let's pause that one for a second. So there's a story being told right now that we can't afford to pay American workers decent salaries, why CEOs' salaries keep going up and up and up. Come on, that's a fiction that's being told that then cuts working families' jobs, that cuts their paychecks. How much is enough? I think every family should be able to pay for their rent or their mortgage, be able to put food on the table, clothes on their kids' back, maybe save a little for retirement, and God forbid, even be able to go on a vacation once in a while, right? These are kind of the basic hallmarks of what it means to be an American. And we're being told that we can't afford that because the CEO needs another $1 million bonus? Right? This is part of why people are upset at Democrats and Republicans, because we're not calling it like it is. So, when people say, well, typically these jobs don't pay, that's just because people have been able to keep those wages too low for too long. If we really want to put the American economy back on track and supercharge the work that's happening, we've got to start paying the people who do the work better. And that's just it.
How do you accomplish that?
Well, so we need to say upward pressure on wages. This is one of those things where we're being told, we suffered through a great recession, and people were being told that their jobs are always at risk. But there are companies now that are making good money, right? And that tax cut that went through was supposed to help them hire more people and pay better wages. So let's call them on it, right? A one-time bonus isn't enough to supercharge the American economy. It's time that the middle class and working people got their fair share of the economic gains that for the last decade have just gone to millionaires and billionaires. And I think that people are ready for that. So let's give people a shot at those wages. Let's hire more people into these positions. Let's make sure that as workers, we're all working together and saying, yeah, we deserve a raise because we've been working hard for over a decade, and it's time that the comeback story comes back to us.
So are you talking about this in a theoretical sense and saying, let's do this, or are you talking about taking governmental action to make it happen?
I think there's pieces that we have to look at in all front, right? So consumers, you should be supporting companies. We should all be supporting companies that treat their workers right. When it comes to governmental action, let's make sure that we're cracking down on companies that are artificially keeping those wages low. So for example, folks that are doing illegal subcontracting when they should be paying working wages. And then, the other piece is let's have a conversation about the amount of taxpayer dollars, the money that you and I have, that's supporting companies who aren't paying a decent wage to their workers. And so those same workers that are putting in those hours are ending up on food assistance programs and other government support because the company which is making money isn't actually paying their workers enough.
When we come back, a Republican representative who is also interested in wages, but in a much different vein. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. As we look ahead to what could happen in this session of the legislature, we talked to Republican Stephen Johnson from Wayland. He's interested in wages for lawmakers. Representative, I can count on one hand the number of times that we've talked about joint resolutions on this program, because generally those are things that are passed to get a sense of the House. This is something that we think is a good idea, sometimes urging Washington to do one thing or not to do something. Mm-hmm. But you have a resolution, FF, I think we checked it before we came on, that would do something that would fundamentally change, not this resolution, it would not be binding, but the idea would fundamentally change the way legislators in this state are compensated. And that's going to get some viewer attention. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so our joint resolution, what it does, is it says our salaries should be equal to the average working Michigander.
And so you would take a look at what people make across the state, come up with a formula to kind of find that average income.
Yep, it'd be the Department of Technology Management and Budget. They crunch these numbers all the time, so they would provide us with their number that they come up with that equals the average wage of a working Michigander.
And do you have any idea what that is?
I think it's approximately $47,000.
So that would be a cut of somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000, $30,000
about a $25,000 cut.
The current legislative salary. Well, what was your purpose in doing that?
Well, I'm looking at kind of where the state of our politics is, and one of my concerns is career politicians, people that try to stay as long as they want. They're trying to make a career, a lifestyle out of this, and we have term limits, and that's good. But I think this is one more step. When we talk about public service, it should be service. It should not be something that you're living high off of. It should be something that you go, you do, and then you want to come back to your community and go back to your real job eventually. And instead what we see is people come here and they want to stay here for as long as possible. And I think there's that aspect, because it would cut our salary. And the other aspect is our salary should be determined on the economy. When the economy is going well, when wages are going up, then our wages should go up. But when the economy takes a downturn, we should feel that as well.
And would you adjust that on a yearly basis?
It would be every 2 years, so after every election.
All right. Well, that's right, because you can't change that compensation.
Yes.
So what kind of response have you got? I know it hasn't been voted on, but what kind of response have you gotten in people that you've talked to?
I didn't make a lot of friends in Lansing when I introduced that one. But for me, I'd love to put it up for a vote and see if anyone's willing to actually vote no on that.
What do you think of the premise that some would forward that there is a certain value to compensating people to attract the kind of people you want to serve?
If that was the case, there's a number of people that won't run for this position because of its current pay grade. So, at what number do we go for? Do you want to go for $100,000 or more? Because, there's going to be millionaires out there that will never run for this position because it's going to be a major pay cut. $25,000 cut to them is not going to be much. To me, at the end of the day, we should be representative of the people. And that, to me, the simplest terms is how much money are they making? And we should be equaling that as well.
This is not something that you have proposed, but there has been conversation in the last 18 months about, in addition to having term limits, that the legislature should serve less often. Well, in the eyes of at least one person who was developing such a plan, serving about the same number of days, but just doing it all together in a big chunk, so you're not in Lansing all year long. Is that something that you would favor?
Absolutely. Right now we're in session Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and we spread it across the whole year. And what that does is it has us in Lansing more times than not, and we kind of get part of this Lansing bubble. We lose track of our district. You see it with members all the time. When we condense it and say, all right, you're going to go to Lansing for this many days, and then you're going to get out of there and you go back to your district, go back to your normal life, and actually interact with your constituents more, I think you get better public policy. I think you would get representatives that were more in touch with their district.
Let's talk about something else I know you're going to want to work on as this next quarter of legislative business begins, and that is criminal justice, something you've already been working on. Tell me about what you would like to focus on.
So one of the things that we've done as a House is done some criminal justice reforms. So I think we've made some good steps. I think there's more that we can do. And just trying to look at the law and trying to see, are there things that people are going for jail for that are really nonviolent crimes? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So we're looking at laws that a lot of people don't even know exist until all of a sudden they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so we want to make sure those people don't go to jail, because once you go to jail, it becomes very hard to get a job after that. So violent offenders, absolutely make sure that they are serving their time. But we want to make sure your average everyday Michigander doesn't go to jail. I think there's a report out there that every citizen probably breaks the law every day without even realizing it. So we're trying to look at, can we get rid of some of these laws that people don't even know about?
One of the things that has been talked about in Lansing, and this is a relatively new conversation in the last 6 to 8 years, is doing just that, taking a look at why we're putting people in jail, why we have, in some cases, higher percentages of incarceration for longer periods of time. There is a very human element that you just described about getting jobs and being able to meet financial obligations, even getting housing. But there is also a financial component of it as it pertains to the state, because it could save the state some money.
Oh, absolutely. So number one, when you put someone in jail, that's going to cost us money with our prison budget right there. But then on the flip side, once they get out of jail, if they have trouble getting a job, now with all the welfare programs we have, we're now funding their housing, medical care, food as well. So I think everyone benefits when we don't put people away in jail. Now, that being said, look, if someone is a danger to society, we absolutely want to lock them up. But people who are not a danger to society, no one wins by throwing them in jail.
One of the representatives who is no longer serving said, this isn't about being soft on crime, but it's about using common sense and applying that not just to people, but to tax dollars.
Absolutely, I would agree.
Let's talk about this, because with an election year coming up, getting things done isn't always easy. Mm-hmm. And after we get past the budget, which will be a big part of what happens in this next quarter, then a lot of folks are going to be ready to go home and start campaigning again, because, as I say, it is an election year. What would you like to see done over the next 3 months before there is a kind of a hiatus for campaign season?
Yeah, so there's one big thing that we're hoping to vote on. It's prevailing wage repeal. So that's what I'm looking forward to. That's going to be probably the biggest piece of legislation we do outside of the budget. What that would do right now with state construction costs, it is inflated through our current law. Tons of red tape. A lot of your small contractors, they don't even know how to handle all this. So by getting rid of prevailing wage, it'll save taxpayers money, and it'll save schools money. They're going to be the biggest beneficiaries here. They're going to save a lot of money on their construction costs. We'll be able to put those dollars back in the classroom.
We're back with more To the Point. What the legislature gets done this quarter could be very important, since an election year could mean from June on, it will be about the election and not about legislation. See you next week. To the Point.